respiratory structures. Amphibians can take in oxygen through their skin, although they also have their lungs or gills to help them respire, because getting all your oxygen by way of diffusion takes freaking forever. So why do we have to have these stupid lung things instead of just using simple diffusion? Well, a couple of reasons. For starter, the bigger
The animal, the more oxygen it needs, and a lot of mammals are pretty big. So we have to actively force air into our lungs in order to get enough oxygen to run our bodies. Also, mammals and birds are warm-blooded, which means that they have to regulate their body temperatures, and that takes many, many calories, and burning those calories requires lots of oxygen. Finally, in order for oxygen to pass through a membrane, the membrane has to be wet. So for a newt to take oxygen in through its skin, the skin has to be moist all the time, which, for a newt isn't a big deal, but, I don't particularly want to be constantly moist. Do you? Fish need oxygen too, of course, but they absorb oxygen that's already dissolved in the water through their gills. If you've ever seen a fish gill, you'll remember that they're just sort of a bunch of filaments of tissue layered together. This gill tissue extracts dissolved oxygen and excretes the carbon dioxide. Still, there are some fish that have lungs, like lungfish, which we call lungfish because they have lungs, and that's actually where lungs first appeared in the animal kingdom. All animals, from reptiles on up, respire with lungs deep in their bodies, basically right behind the heart. So while us more complex animals can't use diffusion to get oxygen directly, our lungs can. Lungs are chock full of oxygen-dissolving membranes that are kept moist with mucus. Moist with mucus, another great band name. The key to these bad boys is that lungs have a ton of surface area, so they can absorb a lot of oxygen at once. You wouldn't know from looking at them, but human lungs contain about 75 square meters of oxygen-dissolving membrane. That's bigger than the roof of my house. And the simple diffusion that your lungs use is pretty frickin' simple. You and I breathe oxygen in through our nose and mouth. It passes down a pipe called your larynx, which then splits off from your esophagus and turns into your trachea, which then branches to form two bronchi, one of which goes into each lung. These bronchi branch off again, forming narrower and narrower tubes called bronchioles. These bronchioles eventually end in tiny sacs called alveoli. Each alveolus is about 1/5 of a millimeter in diameter, and each of us has about 300 million of them, and this, friends, is where the magic happens. Alveoli are little bags of thin, moist membranes, and they're totally covered in tiny, narrow, blood-carrying capillaries. Oxygen dissolves through the membrane and is absorbed by the blood in these capillaries, which then goes off through the circulatory system to make cells all over your body happy and healthy. But while the alveoli are handing over the oxygen, the capillaries are switching it out for carbon dioxide, and the circulatory system just picked up from all over the body. So the alveoli and capillaries basically just swap one gas for another. From there, the alveoli take that CO2 and squeezes it out through the bronchioles, the bronchi, the trachea, finally out of your nose and or mouth. So inhale for me once. Congratulations, oxygen is now in your bloodstream. Now exhale. Wonderful. The CO2 has now left the building, and you don't even have to think about it, so you could think about something more important, like how many Cheetos you could realistically fit into your mouth at the same time. So now you're like, yeah, that's great, Hank, but how do lungs actually work? Like, how do they do the thing where they get moved to come in and out and stuff? Well, eloquent question, well asked. Lungs work like a pump, but they don't actually have any muscles in them that cause them to contract and expand. For that, we have this big flat layer of muscles that sits right underneath the lungs called the thoracic diaphragm. At the end of an exhalation, your diaphragm is relaxed. So picture an arc pushing up on the bottom of your lungs and crowding them out so they don't have very much volume. But when you breathe in, the diaphragm contracts and flattens out, allowing the lungs to open up. And as we know from physics, as the volume of the container grows larger, the pressure inside it goes down. And the fluids, including air, always flow down their pressure gradient from high pressure to low pressure. So as the pressure in our lungs goes down, air flows into them. When the diaphragm relaxes, the pressure inside the lungs becomes higher than the air outside, and the deoxygenated air rushes out. And that is breathing. Now, it just so happens that the circulatory system works on a pumping mechanism just like the respiratory system, except instead of moving air into and out of the lungs,